I never imagined that a single business card could destroy someone's career in 10 seconds flat. Standing in that conference room watching Marcus sneer at me while the entire procurement committee erupted in laughter, I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. 2 weeks. That's all he said, like it was some kind of punchline. Everyone avoided making eye contact with me, their faces turned away in embarrassment or complicity. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Then something inside me snapped. I stood up calmly, walked directly to the vendor's regional manager sitting at the far end of the table, and placed my business card right in front of him. He picked it up slowly, his eyes scanning the text. His face transformed from confusion to absolute terror. His nervous laughter echoed throughout the room, but this time nobody else was laughing with him. 3 months earlier, I had walked through the glass doors of Meridian Manufacturing with butterflies dancing in my stomach and hope lighting up my chest. After 6 years of auditing government contracts in cramped bureaucratic offices, this corporate procurement specialist position felt like my golden ticket to financial stability and professional growth. At 28 years old, I was finally ready to put my investigative skills to work in the private sector. Patricia Williams greeted me on my first morning with genuine warmth that immediately put me at ease. She was in her early 50s with silver streaks threading through her brown hair and laugh lines that spoke of decades spent navigating corporate politics with grace. As my assigned mentor, she walked me through the maze of cubicles, introducing me to colleagues whose names I frantically tried to memorize. Tyler Chen seemed eager to please a 24-year-old junior analyst fresh out of college with an economics degree and nervous energy that reminded me of myself starting out. He had been handling basic vendor database maintenance and was relieved to have someone more experienced taking over the complex contract negotiations. Then Patricia introduced me to Marcus Caldwell, our department director. He stood about 6 feet tall with carefully styled blonde hair and the kind of confident smile that politicians practice in mirrors. His handshake lingered just a moment too long, and his eyes seemed to appraise me in a way that made my skin crawl slightly. "Welcome to the team, Jody," he said, his voice carrying just enough charm to mask something I couldn't quite identify. "I'm sure you'll find our operation here much more streamlined than whatever bureaucratic nightmare you escaped from." The comment stung, but I forced a professional smile. During our first team meeting, I noticed how Marcus dominated every conversation, cutting off colleagues mid-sentence and dismissing suggestions with casual waves of his hand. When Patricia tried to present cost-saving initiatives she had researched, he barely glanced at her spreadsheets before moving on to his own agenda items. My first week involved reviewing existing vendor contracts, and red flags started appearing immediately. Johnson Industrial Supply was charging $43 per unit for basic steel components that I knew typically cost $28. Hartwell Logistics had somehow secured exclusive shipping agreements despite higher rates than their competitors. Most puzzling was Granite Solutions, a consulting firm billing enormous fees for services that seemed vaguely defined at best. I spent my evenings researching market rates and comparing them to our approved vendor pricing. The discrepancies were staggering. Either Meridian Manufacturing had the worst negotiation team in corporate America, or something far more sinister was happening. Patricia noticed my late nights and pulled me aside on Friday afternoon. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper as she glanced around the empty break room. "Jody, I need to share something with you that might save you some headaches down the road. The person who had your position before you, Sandra Martinez, was incredibly thorough in her work. Maybe too thorough if you understand what I mean." My stomach tightened. What happened to Sandra? She started asking a lot of questions about vendor pricing and contract approval processes. Sandra was brilliant at finding inefficiencies and potential savings. She prepared detailed reports showing how we could cut procurement costs by almost 30% annually. "That sounds exactly like what we should be doing. I said, confused. Patricia's expression grew troubled. Sandra thought so too. She presented her findings to Marcus and suggested implementing competitive bidding for all major contracts. Within 2 weeks, she was transferred to our satellite office in Nebraska, handling routine supply orders for our smallest manufacturing plant. The message was crystal clear, but I couldn't accept it. Are you saying Marcus punished her for doing her job well? I'm saying that asking too many questions around here can lead to unexpected career changes, Patricia replied carefully. Some people prefer systems that run smoothly over systems that run efficiently. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about Sandra Martinez and her transfer to Nebraska. I spent hours online researching Meridian Manufacturing's vendor relationships and public contract filings. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Several of our approved vendors had received significant contract renewals without any public bidding process. The timing coincided perfectly with expensive purchases Marcus had made based on his social media posts showing luxury vacations and a new boat that seemed well beyond a corporate director's salary. Monday morning brought our monthly procurement committee meeting where department heads reviewed major upcoming purchases and vendor selections. The conference room buzzed with conversation as regional managers, financial executives, and vendor representatives filled the polished mahogany table. Marcus commanded attention effortlessly, presenting quarterly numbers that painted our procurement department as highly successful. He credited our vendor partnerships for maintaining quality while controlling costs, though my research suggested the opposite was true. When he opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand tentatively. I've been reviewing our steel component contracts, and I noticed we're paying significantly above market rates. Would it be possible to explore competitive bidding to reduce these costs? The room fell silent. Marcus's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. Jody, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but our vendor relationships are built on trust and reliability, not just price. Quality partnerships require investment. Of course, but even accounting for relationship value, our current pricing seems excessive. I calculated potential annual savings of over $200,000 on steel components alone. Marcus's response came swift and sharp. I think what our new team member needs to understand is that procurement isn't just about spreadsheets and calculations. There are strategic considerations that require years of experience to fully appreciate. The dismissal felt like a slap. Around the table, vendor representatives exchanged glances while Meridian executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I had clearly violated some unspoken rule, but I couldn't understand what I had done wrong beyond suggesting we save money. After the meeting, Marcus pulled me aside in the hallway. His friendly demeanor had evaporated, completely replaced by cold calculation that made my pulse quicken. Jody, I need you to understand something very clearly. Your role here is to process contracts and maintain vendor relationships, not to question strategic decisions made above your pay grade. I'd hate to see a promising career derailed by overreaching early on. That evening, I tried logging into our procurement database to continue reviewing contracts, but my access had been restricted. According to the system, I no longer had permission to view historical pricing data or vendor performance metrics. When I called IT support, they claimed the restriction was implemented by management request and refused to provide additional details. The message was unmistakable. I had asked the wrong questions, and now I was being systematically shut out of information that would allow me to do my job effectively. As I sat in my apartment that night, staring at my laptop screen, showing access denied messages, one thought kept echoing through my mind. If Marcus was willing to go this far to hide vendor pricing information, what exactly was he hiding? The answer to that question would eventually destroy his career and change my life forever. But first, I had to survive long enough to find it. The next morning brought a new level of isolation that felt deliberately orchestrated. My computer access remained restricted, cutting me off from essential procurement databases and vendor communication systems. When I approached Tyler for assistance accessing basic contract files, he shifted nervously in his chair and mumbled something about being too busy with his own projects. Patricia's behavior changed dramatically as well. Our daily coffee meetings disappeared without explanation, and she began avoiding eye contact during team gatherings. The warm mentorship that had made my first weeks bearable evaporated overnight, leaving me feeling professionally abandoned. During lunch, I overheard colleagues discussing my performance in hushed tones near the vending machines. Fragments of conversation reached my ears about attitude problems and difficulty adapting to corporate culture. The whispers followed me through hallways, creating an atmosphere of judgment that made every workday feel like an endurance test. Marcus appeared to be the source of these rumors, making casual comments about my adjustment challenges during team meetings. He would reference my government background with subtle disdain, suggesting that bureaucratic thinking was incompatible with dynamic private sector operations. Each comment chipped away at my professional reputation while maintaining plausible deniability. Determined to prove my value despite the obstacles, I began working late evenings when the office was nearly empty. The building's security system tracked employee access, so I knew my extended hours were being recorded. If Marcus wanted to question my dedication, at least I could demonstrate commitment through my schedule. One evening, while organizing files in a shared network drive, I stumbled upon an archived email folder labeled Administrative Correspondence 2022. The folder appeared to have been forgotten during a system migration containing hundreds of messages that someone clearly never intended to preserve. My heart raced as I opened the first few emails. They revealed a pattern of communication between Marcus and 3 specific vendors that went far beyond normal business relationships. Johnson Industrial Supply sent Marcus detailed reports about competitor pricing, allowing him to ensure their bids remained competitive while staying inflated above market rates. Hartwell Logistics emails contained references to consulting payments made to something called Caldwell Advisory Services, which shared Marcus's last name. The messages discussed quarterly retainer fees disguised as logistics optimization consulting, though no actual consulting work was ever specified. Most damaging were emails from Granite Solutions, revealing that their consulting contracts were essentially fiction. The company was paying Marcus's wife, Jennifer Caldwell, $40,000 quarterly for strategic advisory services that existed only on paper. The emails joked about Jennifer's expertise in strategic planning despite her background as a yoga instructor. I spent the next 3 hours documenting everything, taking screenshots and copying email headers that would prove authenticity. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Marcus had been systematically steering lucrative contracts to companies that were essentially paying him kickbacks through his wife's fictional consulting business. Conservative calculations suggested Marcus had received over $600,000 in improper payments during the past 2 years alone. Meanwhile, Meridian Manufacturing had overpaid by approximately $3.2 million due to his manipulation of the bidding process. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed official channels to report it properly. Tuesday morning, I requested a meeting with Helen Morrison, our Human Resources Director. Helen had worked at Meridian for over 15 years and had a reputation for handling sensitive employee issues with discretion and professionalism. Helen's office was decorated with motivational posters about teamwork and integrity that suddenly felt ironic given what I was about to reveal. She listened patiently as I explained discovering the archived emails and offered to show her the evidence I had compiled. Her reaction surprised me. Instead of expressing concern about potential fraud, Helen began asking probing questions about how I had accessed confidential correspondence and whether I had shared this information with anyone outside the company. She seemed more concerned about my investigative methods than the criminal activity I was reporting. "Jody, these are very serious allegations you're making against a senior executive. Before we proceed any further, I need to understand exactly how you came across this information and what your intentions are in bringing it forward." Something in her tone made alarm bells ring in my mind. Helen wasn't treating this like a whistleblower report about corporate fraud. She was treating it like a personnel issue that needed to be contained. I stumbled across the emails while organizing shared files for a project Marcus assigned me. "I'm bringing this forward because the company is losing millions of dollars due to procurement fraud." Helen nodded thoughtfully, taking extensive notes about my access to the files and the timeline of my discovery. She scheduled a follow-up meeting for Friday afternoon, explaining that she needed time to review the situation and consult with legal counsel about proper procedures. "I want you to understand, Jody, that allegations of this nature require careful handling. We need to ensure that any investigation follows proper protocols and protects all parties involved. I'll need you to attend Friday's meeting along with Marcus so we can discuss this situation thoroughly." My stomach dropped. Including Marcus in a meeting about evidence of his criminal activity made no sense unless Helen was planning to warn him about my discoveries. I tried to object, explaining that involving the subject of fraud allegations in the initial investigation would compromise the entire process. Helen's response chilled me to the bone. "Jody, I understand you're coming from a government auditing background where adversarial approaches might be common. Here at Meridian, we believe in collaborative problem solving and giving everyone an opportunity to respond to concerns before drawing conclusions." That evening, I called my former colleague Emma Rodriguez, who now worked as a federal procurement fraud investigator with the state auditor's office. Emma's expertise in corporate fraud cases had made her legendary among government auditors, and she had always encouraged me to stay in touch. Emma listened carefully as I described the evidence and Helen's troubling response. Her reaction was immediate and alarming. "Jody, you need to be extremely careful here. What you're describing sounds like a sophisticated procurement fraud scheme that could have federal implications. If HR is already trying to protect Marcus instead of investigating the allegations, there's a good chance this corruption runs deeper than just one person." She agreed to meet me secretly over the weekend to review the evidence and advise me on proper reporting procedures. Emma warned me to document everything and avoid using company systems for any further investigation, since they could be monitoring my activities. Friday's HR meeting confirmed my worst fears. When I arrived, Marcus was already seated next to Helen, both wearing expressions of concerned professionalism that felt rehearsed. Helen began by explaining that she had briefed Marcus about my allegations and wanted to give him an opportunity to respond. Marcus's performance was masterful. He expressed surprise and disappointment about my accusations, explaining that vendor relationships often involved complex strategic considerations that might appear problematic to someone without experience in private sector procurement. He suggested that my government background might be causing me to misinterpret normal business practices as improper conduct. Helen nodded sympathetically throughout his explanation, taking notes that seemed designed more to document my accusations than to investigate their validity. When I tried to present the email evidence, Helen interrupted to explain that confidential correspondence couldn't be used in personnel discussions without proper legal review. By the meeting's end, Helen had reframed the entire situation as a performance issue related to my adjustment difficulties and lack of understanding about corporate culture. She recommended additional training and closer supervision to help me better integrate with Meridian's business practices. As I left the meeting, I overheard Helen telling Marcus that they needed to handle this situation quickly and quietly to avoid any disruption to ongoing vendor relationships. The implication was crystal clear: they weren't planning to investigate the fraud. They were planning to eliminate the person who discovered it. That weekend, Emma reviewed my evidence with the intention of a detective examining a crime scene. Her conclusion was devastating but not surprising. Jody, you've uncovered a sophisticated procurement fraud network that's stolen millions of dollars from your company. The fact that HR is protecting the perpetrator instead of investigating suggests this corruption extends beyond just Marcus. You're in serious danger of retaliation, and they're going to try to destroy your career to protect this scheme. Emma helped me understand the federal implications of what I had discovered. Interstate vendor contracts involving companies like Hartwell Logistics could trigger federal jurisdiction under wire fraud statutes. The systematic nature of the scheme suggested violations of federal racketeering laws that carried severe criminal penalties. More importantly, Emma revealed that she had been tracking similar fraud patterns at other manufacturing companies across 3 states. My evidence could be the missing piece that connected a much larger criminal enterprise involving organized procurement fraud. But first, I had to survive whatever retaliation Marcus and Helen were planning. As Emma warned me repeatedly that weekend, people who steal millions of dollars don't give up easily when they're discovered. The next few weeks would determine whether I could expose this corruption or whether they would destroy me first. Monday morning, I arrived at work to find a meeting request from Helen scheduled for that afternoon. The subject line read, "Performance Improvement Discussion," and my blood ran cold as I realized the retaliation was beginning. Marcus's campaign to destroy my credibility began immediately and systematically. Monday's performance improvement meeting with Helen established a paper trail suggesting I was struggling with basic job responsibilities and failing to integrate with company culture. Helen documented concerns about my questioning of established procedures and my inability to work collaboratively with vendor partners. Every report I submitted came back with extensive revision requests for minor formatting issues. Marcus would reject procurement analyses that had taken me hours to prepare, claiming the data presentation didn't meet departmental standards that he never bothered to explain. When I asked for clarification about these standards, he would suggest that my questions demonstrated lack of initiative in understanding basic professional expectations. Team meetings became exercises in public humiliation. Marcus would schedule important vendor presentations during my lunch breaks, then reference my absence as evidence of poor commitment. He began assigning me contradictory projects with impossible deadlines, setting me up for failure while maintaining documentation that showed his reasonable attempts to help me succeed. Patricia's betrayal cut the deepest. During our final private conversation, she reluctantly explained that Marcus had threatened to eliminate her position entirely if she continued mentoring me. At 53 years old with 2 children in college, Patricia couldn't afford to lose her job over my situation. "I'm sorry, Jody, but I have to protect my own family. Marcus made it very clear that supporting you would be considered insubordination. I can't risk my pension and benefits for someone who's only been here 3 months. The isolation became crushing. Colleagues avoided me in hallways, turning conversations away when I approached. Tyler stopped returning my emails and began routing all vendor communications through Marcus, directly cutting me out of essential project information. During lunch breaks, I sat alone in my cubicle while former colleagues gathered in the break room, their laughter echoing across the office space. The social ostracism was clearly orchestrated, designed to make every workday feel like psychological warfare. Using my personal laptop from home, I continued building the fraud case against Marcus. Emma provided guidance on documenting the evidence properly, helping me cross-reference public records with company payments that revealed the full scope of his criminal enterprise. Caldwell Advisory Services was registered as a Wyoming LLC with Jennifer Caldwell listed as managing partner, despite having no business experience beyond teaching yoga classes at a local studio. Bank records that Emma accessed through federal channels showed the company had received over $900,000 from Meridian vendors during the past 3 years. The money trail was sophisticated but not unbreakable. Hartwell Logistics would invoice Caldwell Advisory for strategic consulting services, then Caldwell Advisory would issue invoices to Jennifer's personal account. Marcus's lifestyle had changed dramatically during this period, with purchases including a $40,000 boat, a luxury vacation home in Colorado, and private school tuition for their twin daughters. Meanwhile, Meridian Manufacturing's procurement costs had increased by over 20% during Marcus's tenure, despite industry trends showing declining material prices. The company was hemorrhaging money while Marcus's personal wealth grew exponentially. My early performance review was scheduled 2 months ahead of the normal timeline, with Marcus citing concerning patterns in my work quality and professional conduct. The review would provide documentation for termination with cause, eliminating any unemployment benefits and making my next job search significantly more difficult. The psychological pressure intensified when I discovered monitoring software had been installed on my work computer. The program tracked every website I visited, every document I accessed, and every email I sent or received. Marcus was monitoring my digital activities in real time, watching for any evidence that I was continuing my investigation. Emma warned me that this level of surveillance suggested Marcus knew exactly what evidence I had discovered and was preparing for comprehensive retaliation. Federal investigators deal with sophisticated white-collar criminals who understand how to use corporate systems to destroy whistleblowers before they can testify. The harassment escalated beyond professional boundaries when I arrived at work Wednesday morning to find my car tires slashed in the company parking lot. Security cameras in that section had mysteriously malfunctioned overnight, according to the facilities manager, who seemed oddly unsympathetic about the situation. That evening, I discovered my credit cards had been canceled due to suspicious activity reports filed by unknown sources. My bank explained that fraud alerts had triggered automatic account freezes, though they couldn't provide details about who had filed the reports or what suspicious activity had been detected. The message was unmistakable. Marcus's retaliation network extended far beyond Meridian Manufacturing. He had connections with financial institutions and possibly law enforcement that could make my life miserable in ways that couldn't be directly traced back to him. Emma's investigation revealed that similar harassment patterns had been used against whistleblowers at other companies where procurement fraud was occurring. The corruption network had developed sophisticated methods for silencing employees who discovered their criminal activities. Thursday morning brought the final blow. I arrived at my desk to find my personal belongings packed in a cardboard box and my computer access completely terminated. Marcus announced to the assembled procurement team that I was being suspended, pending investigation of serious misconduct allegations involving unauthorized access to confidential company information. The announcement was carefully crafted to suggest I had been caught stealing corporate secrets or violating data security protocols. Marcus's tone conveyed disappointment and concern for company security, painting himself as a responsible manager dealing with an untrustworthy employee. Security personnel escorted me from the building while my former colleagues watched in stunned silence. The walk to the parking lot felt endless, with every step reinforcing the narrative that I was a disgraced employee being removed for legitimate reasons. That evening, Emma delivered devastating news about our federal investigation. Her superiors had mysteriously reassigned the case to a different regional office, claiming workload distribution requirements. The new lead investigator seemed uninterested in pursuing procurement fraud allegations and had already expressed skepticism about the evidence we had compiled. "Jody, I think this corruption network has connections inside federal law enforcement. The timing of this reassignment is too convenient to be coincidental. Someone with significant influence wants this investigation stopped before it gains momentum." The next morning, Tyler called me secretly from his personal phone with shocking news. Marcus had been promoted to regional procurement director, a position that would give him oversight of vendor relationships across 12 manufacturing facilities in 4 states. The promotion was being announced at a celebration meeting with all major vendors present. Patricia's position had been eliminated as promised, though the company cited restructuring requirements rather than retaliation. She blamed me for her job loss during a tearful phone call, explaining that she should have minded her own business instead of encouraging my questions about vendor pricing. The systematic destruction of my career and everyone who had helped me was nearly complete. Marcus had successfully painted me as an unstable employee who had violated company policies and damaged important vendor relationships. Meanwhile, he was being rewarded with expanded authority that would allow him to steal millions more from unsuspecting companies. As I sat in my apartment that evening staring at unemployment paperwork and facing potential bankruptcy, one realization burned through my despair. Marcus was planning a massive celebration meeting where all his corrupt vendor partners would gather to approve contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. Regional executives who could stop this fraud would be present, but they had no idea what was really happening. This meeting represented his ultimate triumph and my final opportunity to expose the truth. But getting into that room would require a level of courage that terrified me because failure wouldn't just mean losing my career. It would mean disappearing completely, just like Sandra Martinez had disappeared into that Nebraska office where inconvenient employees went to be forgotten. The business card that would eventually destroy Marcus's career was already in my purse. I just had to find the strength to use it before he destroyed everything and everyone I cared about. The surveillance revelation from finding the hidden camera shattered any remaining illusion that this was simply corporate politics. Marcus and his network were watching my every move, listening to my phone calls, and tracking my activities with the intensity of professional criminals protecting a sophisticated operation. Emma's voice carried urgency when she called Tuesday evening from a secure line. "Jody, you need to disappear for a few days while we figure out our next move. The corruption network you've uncovered connects to organized crime figures we've been tracking across multiple federal investigations." She explained that procurement fraud rings often involve money laundering operations that require protection from law enforcement and financial institutions. The harassment I was experiencing suggested Marcus's network included corrupted officials who could manipulate credit reports, file false fraud allegations, and coordinate surveillance activities. These people don't just steal money, Jody. They eliminate threats to their operations using methods that can't be traced back to them. You've become a significant threat, and they're escalating their response accordingly. Emma arranged for me to stay with her cousin in a different city while she worked with federal investigators who weren't compromised by the corruption network. The FBI's white-collar crime unit had been building cases against procurement fraud operations for 2 years, but they needed insider evidence to make arrests stick. Before leaving town, I drove past Meridian Manufacturing one final time to see if I could gather any additional evidence. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few late-working managers, but I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Marcus's luxury sedan was parked next to an identical black SUV with tinted windows and government license plates. Through my binoculars, I could see 2 men in dark suits meeting with Marcus in his office, their body language suggesting this was not a routine business discussion. Emma's warning about law enforcement corruption suddenly felt much more real. If Marcus had federal agents protecting his operation, then my evidence might not be enough to bring him down. Worse, approaching the wrong investigator could get me killed. The next few days passed in a blur of fear and planning. Emma's cousin lived in a small apartment across state lines, providing temporary safety, while we developed a strategy for exposing the corruption network without getting me murdered in the process. Emma revealed that federal investigators had identified procurement fraud operations in 17 companies across 6 states, all following similar patterns to what I had discovered at Meridian. The networks were stealing an estimated $40 million annually while using intimidation and violence to silence whistleblowers. We've had 3 potential witnesses disappear over the past 18 months, Emma explained grimly. One relocated after receiving death threats. Another suffered a suspicious car accident that left him permanently disabled. The third just vanished completely after agreeing to cooperate with federal investigators. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. Marcus wasn't just stealing from Meridian Manufacturing, he was part of a sophisticated network that had infiltrated procurement departments across multiple corporations and industries. My evidence could be the key to bringing down the entire operation, but only if I could survive long enough to testify. Emma's investigation had uncovered disturbing connections between the procurement fraud network and several federal employees who had been feeding information about ongoing investigations back to the criminals. This explained why our case had been mysteriously reassigned, and why Marcus seemed to know exactly how to counter every move I made. Friday evening brought terrible news. Tyler called Emma's secure number with information about Marcus's promotion celebration. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at 8:30, with regional executives, vendor representatives, and financial officials all attending to approve a massive contract expansion. Marcus has been bragging about eliminating the troublemaker who was questioning vendor relationships, Tyler whispered. He's telling everyone that federal investigators cleared him of any wrongdoing and that Jody was just a disgruntled employee making false accusations. The contract they planned to approve would cement the fraud network's control over Meridian's procurement operations for the next 5 years, guaranteeing them access to steal over $20 million while making it nearly impossible for future whistleblowers to challenge their authority. Emma spent the weekend coordinating with FBI agents she trusted, building a plan that could expose the corruption without getting me killed. The strategy was risky, but potentially devastating. Infiltrate the celebration meeting as a federal investigator and catch the entire network in the act of finalizing illegal contracts. The FBI has been trying to get inside one of these meetings for 2 years, Emma explained. If we can record Marcus and his vendor partners discussing their criminal arrangements, we'll have evidence that could dismantle the entire network. She provided me with official federal investigator credentials and a sophisticated recording device disguised as a business card holder. The credentials were legitimate, issued under a consulting contract that would allow me to investigate procurement fraud on behalf of federal agencies. Sunday night, Emma positioned FBI agents around Meridian Manufacturing while I prepared for what could be either the most important or the last day of my life. The plan required perfect timing and flawless execution because Marcus's network would react violently if they realized they were being recorded. Remember, Jody, you're not just exposing Marcus tomorrow. You're potentially saving dozens of companies from losing millions of dollars and protecting future whistleblowers from retaliation. The courage you show tomorrow could change how these crimes are investigated and prosecuted. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I drove toward Meridian Manufacturing. Marcus's celebration meeting would begin in 30 minutes, giving me just enough time to position myself and activate the recording equipment before the criminal conspiracy revealed itself. As I walked toward the building wearing my federal credentials and carrying evidence that could destroy careers and send people to prison for decades, one thought kept echoing through my mind. In a few minutes, I would either be a hero who brought down a sophisticated criminal network or a victim whose disappearance would be explained away as another disgruntled employee who couldn't handle corporate reality. The business card in my pocket felt heavier than it should have, considering it was just paper and ink. But sometimes the smallest objects carry the power to change everything, and this particular piece of paper was about to end Marcus Caldwell's career in the most spectacular way imaginable. Suspended from work and facing mounting financial pressure, I felt the walls closing in from every direction. Meridian Manufacturing had frozen my final paycheck, claiming ongoing investigation protocols required holding compensation until misconduct allegations were resolved. Without that income covering rent and basic expenses became impossible within weeks. The apartment complex management delivered another devastating blow Tuesday morning. My lease renewal application had been denied due to employment verification issues, forcing me to vacate the premises within 30 days. When I protested that my employment status was under investigation rather than terminated the property, manager explained that corporate policy required stable income documentation for lease renewals. Marcus's network had clearly reached into my personal life, manipulating systems designed to protect people like me. The harassment extended beyond professional retaliation into comprehensive life destruction, targeting every aspect of my financial stability and social connections. Emma delivered crushing news during our Wednesday evening phone call. The federal investigation that had offered hope of justice was being systematically dismantled by corrupted officials who were feeding information back to Marcus's criminal network. Jody, I've discovered that the new lead investigator assigned to your case has financial connections to several companies involved in the procurement fraud scheme. He's been deliberately slowing down evidence review and questioning the credibility of our documentation. The corruption reached into federal law enforcement agencies, making it nearly impossible to find investigators who weren't compromised by Marcus's network. Emma explained that sophisticated white-collar crime organizations often recruit corrupt officials specifically to protect their operations from federal prosecution. We're dealing with people who have been planning for this kind of exposure for years. They have backup plans, escape routes, and protection networks that extend into multiple government agencies. Your evidence threatens a criminal enterprise worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Thursday brought the most demoralizing development yet. Marcus held a company-wide meeting to announce his promotion to Regional Procurement Director, a position that would give him authority over vendor relationships across 12 manufacturing facilities in 4 states. Tyler attended the meeting and secretly recorded Marcus's speech for me. Listening to Marcus describe his success in streamlining vendor relationships and eliminating inefficiencies felt like psychological torture. He was being rewarded for the exact criminal behavior I had tried to expose. Under my leadership, we've built strategic partnerships that prioritize reliability and quality over short-term cost-cutting, Marcus announced to applause from executives who had no idea they were celebrating their own victimization. The promotion would allow Marcus to expand his fraud scheme exponentially, potentially stealing tens of millions of dollars from companies across multiple states, while using his new authority to silence anyone who questioned his methods. Patricia called me Friday evening sobbing about losing her position due to departmental restructuring. The company had eliminated her role while claiming budget constraints, though they were somehow able to afford Marcus's salary increase and expanded responsibilities. I should have minded my own business instead of encouraging your questions about vendor pricing, Patricia cried. Now I'm 53 years old with no job and college tuition bills I can't afford to pay. Her pain cut through me like a knife. Marcus hadn't just destroyed my career. He had systematically eliminated everyone who had shown me kindness or supported my investigation. Patricia's job loss was collateral damage in his war against accountability. The psychological manipulation was working perfectly. I felt responsible for every person who had suffered because of my decision to expose procurement fraud. Marcus had successfully isolated me from potential allies while demonstrating the consequences of crossing his criminal network. Emma's investigation revealed the true scope of what we were fighting against. Federal agents had identified procurement fraud operations in companies across 17 states, all following similar patterns to Marcus's scheme at Meridian Manufacturing. The network was stealing an estimated $60 million annually while destroying the lives of anyone who threatened their operations. We've documented 12 cases where potential whistleblowers were intimidated, harassed, or worse, Emma explained. These people understand that maintaining their criminal enterprise requires eliminating threats before they can expose the truth. Saturday evening brought news that made me physically sick. Marcus was planning a massive celebration meeting with all his corrupt vendor partners to approve contracts worth over $30 million. The meeting would include regional executives who could stop the fraud if they understood what was happening. But these executives would be presented with carefully crafted information designed to make Marcus look like a procurement genius who had built profitable vendor relationships through strategic thinking. They would approve contracts that guaranteed the criminal network access to steal millions more dollars over the next 5 years. Tyler's secret phone call revealed the meeting's true purpose. Marcus has been telling everyone that federal investigators cleared him of wrongdoing and that you were just a disgruntled employee making false accusations. He's using your suspension as proof that the company's vendor relationships are legitimate. The celebration would cement Marcus's triumph while destroying any remaining chance of exposing his criminal activities. Regional executives would leave the meeting convinced that procurement operations were running smoothly and efficiently under his leadership. As I sat in my temporary apartment Sunday night facing eviction and bankruptcy while watching Marcus prepare to steal millions more dollars, despair nearly overwhelmed me completely. The criminal network had won through systematic intimidation and corruption, proving that whistleblowers were powerless against sophisticated fraud operations. But Emma's weekend investigation had uncovered one crucial piece of information that changed everything. The FBI's white-collar crime unit had been building parallel cases against procurement fraud networks for 3 years, and they needed insider evidence to make arrests stick. Jody. There are federal agents who haven't been compromised by this corruption network. They've been waiting for someone with your evidence and courage to help them bring down these criminal enterprises. Monday's meeting represents the perfect opportunity to catch Marcus and his network in the act. She explained that federal investigators had been trying to infiltrate these celebration meetings for 2 years without success. If I could get inside and record the criminal conspiracy approving illegal contracts, the FBI would have evidence that could dismantle the entire network. You wouldn't just be exposing Marcus tomorrow. You'd be saving dozens of companies from losing millions of dollars and protecting future whistleblowers from retaliation. The courage you show could change how these crimes are investigated and prosecuted. Emma provided legitimate federal investigator credentials and sophisticated recording equipment disguised as a business card holder. The credentials were real, issued under a consulting contract that authorized me to investigate procurement fraud on behalf of federal agencies. As Monday morning approached, I realized this was my final opportunity to expose the truth before Marcus's criminal network became untouchable. The business card that would eventually destroy his career was already in my possession. I just had to find the courage to walk into that room and use it. The next few hours would determine whether justice prevailed or whether sophisticated criminals could continue stealing millions while destroying anyone brave enough to challenge their authority. Either way, Marcus Caldwell's career was about to end in the most spectacular way imaginable. Emma's revelation about the FBI's parallel investigation changed everything. For months, I had felt like David facing Goliath, armed only with evidence and courage against a sophisticated criminal network with unlimited resources and corrupt connections. Now I learned that federal agents had been building cases against procurement fraud operations for 3 years, waiting for exactly the kind of insider evidence I possessed. The white-collar crime unit has been tracking these networks across multiple states, but they've never been able to get inside one of these celebration meetings where the criminal conspiracy operates openly, Emma explained during our final planning session Sunday evening. She provided me with legitimate federal investigator credentials issued under a consulting contract that authorized investigation of procurement fraud on behalf of federal agencies. The credentials were completely authentic, backed by paperwork that could withstand scrutiny from corporate security or suspicious vendors. Jody, you're not just going to be posing as a federal investigator tomorrow. You actually are a federal investigator working under contract to expose procurement fraud. Everything you do in that meeting will be authorized by federal law enforcement agencies. The recording equipment was sophisticated beyond anything I had imagined. The business card holder contained digital recording devices that could capture conversations from across a large conference room while transmitting data to FBI agents positioned outside the building. Emma positioned federal backup around Meridian Manufacturing Sunday night, with agents monitoring radio frequencies and prepared to intervene if the situation became dangerous. The operation represented 2 years of planning and preparation, finally coming together around evidence I had stumbled across while organizing shared files. Remember, these people are sophisticated criminals who have been operating successfully for years. They'll react violently if they realize they're being recorded, so everything depends on perfect execution and timing. Monday morning arrived with gray skies that matched my emotional state as I drove toward Meridian Manufacturing for what could be either the most important or the final day of my life. The federal credentials felt surreal in my pocket, transforming me from a suspended employee into an undercover federal investigator. I arrived 30 minutes before the celebration meeting was scheduled to begin, giving me time to position myself and activate the recording equipment before Marcus and his criminal network revealed themselves. The building's security guard recognized me and started to object to my presence, but my federal credentials immediately changed his attitude. "I'm here conducting an investigation on behalf of federal agencies," I explained calmly, showing him documentation that proved my authority to access the premises. "This is official government business related to procurement fraud allegations." The conference room was already being prepared for Marcus's triumph celebration, with catering staff arranging refreshments and audio-visual equipment for presentations about expanded vendor relationships. Regional executives began arriving early, clearly excited about approving contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. Marcus entered the conference room radiating confidence and satisfaction, greeting vendor representatives with the casual familiarity of long-term criminal partners. Hartwell Logistics sent their regional manager David Walsh, while Johnson Industrial Supply was represented by procurement director Sarah Chen. Granite Solutions arrived with their executive team ready to discuss expanding their fictional consulting contracts. As the meeting began, Marcus presented quarterly reports showing impressive cost control and vendor relationship management that painted him as a procurement genius. The regional executives listened approvingly as he described strategic partnerships that prioritized quality and reliability over short-term price considerations. "Our vendor relationships have delivered consistent results while maintaining the highest standards of integrity and professional excellence." Marcus announced, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed he had eliminated all threats to his criminal empire. David Walsh from Hartwell Logistics stood to present their expanded service offerings, describing logistics optimization consulting that would be provided through Caldwell Advisory Services. The presentation was carefully crafted to make the kickback arrangement sound like legitimate business strategy. "We've developed specialized consulting services that can help Meridian optimize their supply chain efficiency while reducing long-term operational costs," Walsh explained, never mentioning that the consulting services were fictional and the payments were going directly to Marcus's wife. Regional executives asked detailed questions about cost projections and service deliverables, clearly impressed by the comprehensive planning and strategic thinking behind these vendor partnerships. They had no idea they were being systematically defrauded by a sophisticated criminal network. As the meeting progressed, Marcus's confidence grew visibly. He made casual references to eliminating troublemakers who had questioned vendor relationships, describing my suspension as evidence that federal investigators had cleared him of any wrongdoing. "We had one employee who couldn't adapt to our collaborative vendor partnership model," Marcus explained dismissively. "Federal investigators reviewed her allegations thoroughly and found no merit to her claims. Sometimes government employees struggle to understand private sector business practices." The lies flowed smoothly from his mouth, each word designed to reinforce the narrative that he was a responsible executive who had been falsely accused by a disgruntled employee. Regional executives nodded sympathetically, believing they were supporting a manager who had handled a difficult personnel situation professionally. Then Marcus made the mistake that would destroy his career forever. Feeling completely secure in his triumph, he stood up and addressed the room with arrogant satisfaction. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that we've eliminated the last obstacle to our expanded vendor partnerships. 2 weeks. That's all it took to handle the troublemaker who was questioning our strategic relationships." The room erupted in laughter as vendor representatives and some executives joined Marcus in celebrating what they believed was his clever management of a difficult employee. The laughter echoed off the conference room walls, each chuckle representing another nail in the coffin of corporate accountability. But Marcus's triumph lasted only 10 more seconds. I stood up calmly, my federal credentials giving me the authority to act on behalf of the United States government, and walked directly toward David Walsh. Every person in that room was about to discover that the troublemaker they thought had been eliminated was actually a federal investigator who had recorded every word of their criminal conspiracy. The business card in my hand contained more than just my contact information. It contained the power to end careers, expose millions in theft, and send sophisticated criminals to federal prison for decades. As I placed that card in front of David Walsh, I realized that sometimes justice requires ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Marcus had threatened to destroy me in 2 weeks, but I was about to destroy his entire criminal empire in the next 10 seconds. The business card I placed in front of David Walsh read, "Jody Mitchell, Federal Procurement Fraud Consultant, FBI White Collar Crime Division." Every word on that card was legitimate, backed by federal credentials that authorized me to investigate criminal violations of procurement laws on behalf of the United States government. Walsh picked up the card slowly, his eyes scanning the official FBI seal and federal contact information that proved beyond doubt that he was facing a federal investigator, not a suspended employee. His face transformed from confusion to absolute terror as he realized every conversation in that meeting had been recorded by federal agents. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced calmly, my voice carrying the authority of someone speaking for the federal government. "You are all participants in a federal investigation of procurement fraud, money laundering, and racketeering violations. Every word spoken in this meeting has been recorded and will be used as evidence in federal criminal proceedings." The conference room erupted into chaos. Marcus's face went white as he grasped that his celebration of eliminating troublemakers had just been recorded by federal investigators. Regional executives who had been approving illegal contracts scrambled to distance themselves from what they suddenly realized was a criminal conspiracy. David Walsh began stuttering explanations about legitimate business relationships, but his nervous laughter echoed through the room as he understood that federal agents had documented years of criminal activity. Sarah Chen from Johnson Industrial Supply dropped her presentation materials while frantically calculating how many years in federal prison she was facing. FBI agents entered the conference room within minutes, led by Agent Thompson from the White Collar Crime Division, who had been coordinating the investigation. Marcus tried to maintain his composure, demanding to see warrants and threatening legal action, but his voice betrayed the panic of someone whose criminal empire was collapsing. "Marcus Caldwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and violations of federal racketeering laws," Agent Thompson announced while reading him his rights. "The investigation you thought you had stopped has been ongoing for 2 years. The scope of evidence was overwhelming. Federal agents had traced over $2.3 million in kickback payments to Caldwell Advisory Services, documented systematic overcharges totaling $8.7 million across 12 companies, and identified criminal conspiracy participants in 6 states. Helen Morrison from Human Resources was arrested for conspiracy and obstruction of justice after agents discovered she had received payments from Granite Solutions for suppressing fraud complaints. Her husband's employment with corrupt vendors provided the connection that explained her protection of Marcus's criminal activities. Regional executives who had unknowingly approved fraudulent contracts were treated as victims rather than conspirators, since recorded evidence proved they believed they were making legitimate business decisions based on false information provided by Marcus and his network. The federal investigation revealed Marcus's scheme was part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had infiltrated procurement departments across 47 companies in 14 states. Federal agents estimated the network had stolen over $120 million during 5 years of operation. Marcus's assets were immediately frozen, including his luxury boat vacation home in Colorado and his wife Jennifer's fictional consulting company. Federal marshals seized over $900,000 from bank accounts linked to Caldwell Advisory Services funds that would be returned to victimized companies. The case became a landmark federal prosecution of procurement fraud networks, resulting in 37 indictments and convictions ranging from 18 months to 25 years in federal prison. Marcus received the maximum sentence of 22 years due to his leadership role in the criminal enterprise and his systematic destruction of whistleblowers. 3 months after the arrests, I received a formal commendation from the FBI director for exceptional service in exposing procurement fraud that had victimized dozens of companies. The federal consulting position became permanent with responsibility for training corporate investigators and developing protocols to protect whistleblowers from retaliation. Meridian Manufacturing's CEO personally apologized for the company's failure to protect me from retaliation and offered Marcus's former position as regional procurement director. I declined the corporate role, preferring federal work that could prevent other companies from experiencing similar victimization. Patricia Williams was rehired with full restoration of benefits and a promotion to senior procurement analyst, a position created specifically to implement oversight protocols I had recommended. Tyler received recognition for his courage in secretly providing information to federal investigators, despite pressure from Marcus to remain silent. The company recovered over $6.8 million in fraudulent overpayments through federal asset forfeiture proceedings. Additional recovery efforts were ongoing against other companies in Marcus's criminal network, with total restitution expected to exceed $50 million. Federal legislation was introduced requiring mandatory reporting protocols for procurement fraud and establishing protections for corporate whistleblowers similar to those available to government employees. The bill was named the Corporate Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act, partly in recognition of cases like mine. 6 months later, I testified before congressional committees about procurement fraud prevention and whistleblower protection. My testimony helped pass federal legislation requiring independent oversight of corporate procurement operations and establishing severe penalties for retaliation against employees who report financial crimes. The personal cost of exposing this corruption was significant but temporary. My credit was restored, my professional reputation was enhanced rather than damaged, and I gained national recognition as an expert in procurement fraud investigation. More importantly, my courage prevented other companies from losing millions of dollars to similar criminal schemes. During Marcus's sentencing hearing, I chose to deliver a victim impact statement that focused on the broader implications of procurement fraud rather than personal grievances. I spoke about how corruption destroys trust in business relationships, damages honest companies trying to compete fairly, and creates environments where employees fear retaliation for doing what's right. Your Honor, this case demonstrates that ordinary employees have extraordinary power to protect their companies and colleagues from criminal victimization, I told the court, but that power only works when we have systems that protect people who speak up against wrongdoing. Marcus showed no remorse during sentencing, maintaining that his actions were standard business practices that had been mischaracterized by overzealous federal prosecutors. His lack of accountability reinforced my conviction that exposing this corruption had been essential for protecting other potential victims. The business card that ended Marcus's career became a symbol of how small acts of courage can create massive change. That piece of paper represented more than just my federal credentials. It embodied the principle that sophisticated criminals are only as powerful as the silence that protects them. Today, I work with companies across the country to implement procurement oversight systems and train employees to recognize fraud indicators. My experience taught me that corporate accountability requires individual courage, but individual courage requires systemic protection for people who choose to do what's right. The lesson I learned through this experience is profound and universal. Integrity isn't about winning popularity contests or avoiding conflict. It's about having the courage to act on your convictions when everyone else chooses comfort over conscience. Sometimes the smallest gestures, like handing someone a business card, can change everything when they're backed by truth evidence and the determination to protect others from harm. Have you ever faced a situation where speaking up felt impossible because of potential consequences? The courage to expose wrongdoing doesn't require special training or superhuman bravery. It just requires ordinary people deciding that protecting others is worth personal risk. Every person who chooses accountability over silence makes the world a safer place for everyone who comes after them. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it inspires you to trust your instincts when you see something wrong, even if speaking up feels dangerous. Together, we can create workplaces where honesty is rewarded instead of punished, and where criminals like Marcus Caldwell can't destroy lives to protect their theft. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it. Subscribe for more stories about courage and accountability. Share it with anyone who might need inspiration to speak up against wrongdoing, and leave a comment about your own experiences with workplace integrity challenges. Your engagement helps these important stories reach people who need to hear them most. May you always have the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult. And may you find strength in knowing that truth and justice eventually prevail when good people refuse to stay silent.